Howdy, friends. The economic train of Russia has finally arrived at the station, and it's dead end. I just love this phrase. It describes current state of Russian economy perfectly well. Welcome to weekly economic update from Russia. The economy is changing so fast that every single week there's plenty to talk about and to update, and this is week 28 in review. I call this episode All Industries Are Dying, All is Going to Hell. And if you want very short summary of this live stream, that is it. All is going to hell. And if you want numbers, figures, events, and more details, then stick around because I have plenty of that coming up. Howdy everyone, my name is Konstantin. Welcome to Inside Russia, where usual Russia is explained by the unusual Russian. As usual, you will not find here any BS, lies, or propaganda. Instead, you'll find plenty of truth, common sense, and logic, and numbers, and figures, and events, and details, and emotions too, because, hey, I'm a human being after all. I love this title, All is Going to Hell. And it can be applied to all upcoming weekly economic reviews that I plan on making every week. It can be applied for a very long time because Russia has entered this mega economic recession period that will last for a very long time. No one can tell you how long it'll last. And if someone tells you don't listen, no one knows. My bet is it'll last at least 20 years or so. I was thinking of naming this live stream the New Anti-Records, but I'll keep the name for later, as there will be many anti-records in the future, near future, so I'll get to that. Now, to the analysis. The economy can be analyzed at three main levels, each with its own focus and scope. They are individual level, also called Macroeconomic agents. It studies individuals, households, and businesses. Then there is microeconomy, studies specific sectors or markets, and macroeconomy. It studies entire national economy. And this is how I structure my weekly economic updates here at Inside Russia. And I would like to start with microeconomic agents. Basically, it's about what impact in the economy have the changes on lives of regular folks. I have a very good example today, and I'll be starting with microeconomic agents. Basically, I'll be starting how regular people feeling the pain of Russian economy demising. Okay, I'm often asked what I mean when I say demise of Russian economy. And that's a good question and the right question, because demise is a very broad term. Okay, to me, demise of Russian economy is pretty simple. When a regular Russian person wakes up, goes to work, but there's no work because consumers don't have much money, they don't spend on anything but on utilities and food. When a person is laid off due to not bad performance, but to the lack of work, and the person has no saving to feed the family because economic situation is tight. When he gets to a store and finds there isn't much food on the shelves, and the food that is on the shelves costs so much that it's unaffordable. When a fire breaks out, but firefighters don't show up because the state didn't pay their salaries for the previous month. When a person goes to a bus station, but bus doesn't come for the same reason, no money to run bus service. In my picture of the world, this is the economic demise. And now I want to show you something that affects lives of regular folks. In Lvov, a medium-sized Russian town in the western Russia with a population of about 17,000 people. In Lvov, there are 7 bus routes, and people rely on the bus routes for transportation because, frankly, Lvov isn't a very rich town like Moscow. And not too many people have cars. So a lot of regular people rely on buses. Well, in Lvov, 2 bus routes out of 7 have been cancelled. The mayor of Lvov, Alexei Klemeshov, explained that the routes have become unprofitable. It's become too expensive to run bus services. He promised to reconsider the bus routes in this upcoming fall. Meanwhile, he said, and I quote, "The residents of Lvov have the right to walk to the nearest bus route." Now, I want to comment this scene. This is the mayor right there, and this is an online meeting of a Lvov city, town administration. That's what it says in large letters. Administration of the town of Lvov. That's what he's saying. We have 2 private companies responsible for transportation. Recently, there have not been many passengers, and then the routes have become non-profitable. One of the transportation companies refused to continue operations. Cancelled 2 routes. It cannot work at loss. The administration held competition, and no one showed up for these 2 bus routes. There are currently 2 bus routes unoperational. We're waiting for the fall to come. So we were working on these new routes. Currently, the residents have right so they walk about 20 to 30 minutes to the closest route. They have a right to walk to the closest bus route. And you know what? I absolutely agree with this good fella. The citizens of Lvov, the residents of Lvov, the citizens of Russia, they do have the right to walk. For now, of course, we don't know what future holds for Russians, but for now, they have the right to walk. And you know what? A lot of people out of those 17,000 residents of Lvov are walking now because their buses, 2 routes, that's not a joke. 2 out of 7 routes, the buses aren't running. And in my eyes, this is the demise. And what's happening in Lvov, it's not an exception. It's becoming the rule. These problems start appearing on the map of Russia with alarming speed, not just with transportation, but with stores closing, with utilities companies not maintaining equipment, and so forth. Now, this is a first level microeconomic agents. And then let's move to the markets, to microeconomics. Oil and gas revenues. I'll start with that because it's the most important industry in Russia. It's the bread maker. It feeds the entire country. Well, I kid you not. In good, fat years, some 20 years ago, Russian federal budget consisted of oil and gas revenues by 47%. So I kid you not, they are the bread makers. So oil revenues, we're seeing a huge drop in the recent weeks. We're actually seeing the biggest drop ever recorded. The drop in June is 34%. In monetary terms, in money, it's 6 trillion Russian rubles in the first 6 months of 2025. That's how much Russia has taken in the revenues. And with this dynamic, this 6 trillion rubles for the first 6 months, if everything goes as it's been going so far, oil revenue, it will amount for 12 trillion rubles for Russia for the entire year. And this is twice as little as planned for oil and gas revenues for 2025 in the federal budget that was made in the last year, the end of the last year. 25 trillions planned, and so far Russia is on the track to 12 millions. And that is only if oil prices don't fall any longer. And they have been falling. All right, let's talk about quantity of oil sold. Quantity also dropped, so it's not just a matter of price. In June, compared to May, 6% less. In June, Russia sold 3.4 million barrels of oil per day. And every month, Russia exports less and less. To China, export decreased by 15% to 1 million barrels per day. And to India, the exports decreased by 1.2% to 1.5 million barrels per day. So we're seeing the drop both in money and in quantity, and that's a bad combination. That speaks volumes. But the most important thing, and this is somehow overlooked by everyone, I want you to see how much Russia exports in general. 3.4 million barrels per day currently. 1 million goes to China, 1.5 million goes to India. Combined, two countries, two biggest clients, amount to 2.5 million barrels per day. And 0.9 million barrels, 900,000 barrels, go to somewhere else. Imagine India and China reduce buying Russia's oil or give up completely. What happens then? Complete stop for Russian oil industry. Any investor out there knows the term diversification. And it looks like Russia oil revenues are locked in. They're not diversified. But you know what? They cannot be. Because by criminal actions, Russia has placed itself in the position where it cannot sell oil to pretty much anywhere but China and India. And things are already catastrophical, but they can get even worse. I have a gut feeling, something's telling me that they will get worse. Now, let's talk about banking industry. Last week brought alarming news, but we have had plenty of alarming news this year, and they just keep on coming. Some numbers for you. The total amount of defaulted loans in Russia has reached 1.5 trillion rubles. In first quarter of 2025, there were 13 million new defaults. 13 million new defaults. In Russia, it's considered if loan is unpaid for 60 or more days for 2 months, it's defaulted. But think of this number, 13 million. How many Russians out there? 146 million. That's official number. Probably more because last few years Russian population has been dropping by 1 million per year. So, but let's take that number, the last official number, 146 million. 13 million defaulted loans out there. That's a little less than 10%. I think it's 8%, right? Imagine that. 8% of Russians are in defaults. So Russian collectors received 13 million new clients, defaulted loans. This is the record number for the past 6 years. And an interesting fact, the price of defaulted loans has dropped. The collectors don't want to pay for the new clients, for the new loans. They understand that now there is a very high risk of those loans being non-collected in the future. And it tells a lot of general situation with consumer financial health in the country. The collectors, they know. They are the people to go to. The collectors and the pawn shops. Now, the majority of current defaulted loans are accounted for by the borrowers who took out loans in 2023 and 2024. And this is very important. I'd like to zero in on that. 2 years ago, we were seeing many, both Russian and foreign experts, economists, talking of how Russian economy was circumventing the international sanctions, and it was growing. I read it everywhere, in the New York Times, in the Wall Street Journal, heard it from the IMF, the World Bank, and of course Russian propaganda, headed by Vladimir Putin himself. They were saying, oh, look, the economic growth, people making fabulous money, they spend a lot, there's lots of business activities and the salaries are growing and so forth. In my opinion, and I've said that many times, that growth was artificial. It was fueled by huge financial influx into the military-industrial complex and Russians, regular people, taking out bank loans in record numbers, including credit cards, charging their credit cards and getting the credit cards issued. In the first quarter of 2025, there were 66 more defaulted loans in quantity compared to the first quarter of 2024, and 33% more defaulted loans in money. So Russians taking out loans like crazy in 2023 and then 2024 are defaulting now. Do you know how this is called? The party is over. The hangover is here. Okay, enough of banking industry. Let's talk of real estate. Another huge market, another huge industry, a cornerstone of any economy, really. Generally speaking, the trend for real estate industry is what I call going down. Makes a perfect sense because everything else is going down. Layoffs, mortgage interest rates starting at 28%, galloping inflation. That doesn't help real estate industry. It cannot thrive in such environment, plain and simple. But it's one thing to talk about it and forecast. And I've started forecasting a big crisis of Russian real estate market last year in late summer of 2024, and it intensified in the fall. And so anyway, it's one thing to talk about it, and that's a different thing to have numbers at hand. These are the numbers. In Moscow, and that's Russia's largest, richest real estate market, from January to May of 2025, the sales of new construction dropped by 13%. Then, in June alone, the sales of new construction dropped by 42%. And it's not a seasonal drop. It doesn't happen. The seasonal drop, people buy fewer apartments. It's tiny. It's up to 5%. That's it. 42%. And absolutely logically, the prices for real estate started falling. Nothing major, not a catastrophe at this point, but different experts report this new trend, and it speaks volumes. Prices started going down. Well, I have a personal story to share. Every week in the last couple months, I have some salesperson calls me and offers to buy apartments. Usually they call from Moscow and they offer apartments in Moscow, and they call from Rostov-on-Don. That's the two major cities that I lived in Russia, between these two cities before I fled Russia. So, but to them, I still live in Russia. They don't know I live in Uzbekistan. So they call me as if I'm just a regular Russian Ivan, and they offer me to buy new construction, new apartments. I was recently offered a 55% discount on a new apartment in the Rostov-on-Don. It never happened before. I never heard of 55% discount on an apartment. Apartment built, ready, it's not in the construction, commenced, okay, ready to move in. Interesting. Very interesting trend started to appear. I will keep my eyes open as I watch Russian real estate market performance very closely, and I think it's a hugely important indicator of the health of Russian economy in general, because it's real estate. Very interesting piece of news came from the deputy director of TSMAK. I know it's a hard Russian abbreviation, TSMAK, but I keep on hearing it every single day now. TSMAK stands in English as the Center for Macroeconomic Analysis of Russian government, and it's a government agency, and it monitors and forecasts macroeconomic trends in the country. It's basically is the agency that tells of the general health of Russian economy. Well, the deputy director of TSMAK is Dmitry Belousov. You might have heard the last name. Dmitry Belousov is one of country's key macroeconomists, and he's good, smart, well-educated, excellent economist. Dmitry Belousov is also the younger brother of Russian Minister of Defense Andrei Belousov. So Belousov Jr. gave a long interview to a media called Business Online about 10 days ago, where he spoke about the current state of Russian economy. He spoke of the forecast for the future, the economic model of Russia, the ruble exchange rate and its future, the federal budget, the key interest rate, the inflation, and many other key economic indicators. I follow TSMAK. I listen to this guy every time he speaks, and I read the materials that they give out. They have been bold, and they don't tell the whole truth, but at least they tell some truth. And this is what he said. Now, I want you to listen carefully, because it's probably the most shocking phrase I heard in quite some time. I quote Dmitry Belousov, the deputy director of the Central for Macroeconomic Analysis of Russian Federation, the Russian government agency. I quote, "In the next 10 to 15 years, we will see economic news reports coming from Russia that are more scary than horror movies. Unquote. I repeat, in the next 10 to 15 years, we will see economic news reports that are more scary than horror movies. I've told I've told of the economic tsunami. This is this great, big, huge force, economic force that eventually reaches Russia and just destroys everything in its path. My term, I coined it, the economic tsunami. But this guy, one of the top Russian officials, by the way, in the next 10 to 15 years, we will see economic news reports that are more scary than horror movies. I love it. It's even better than the economic tsunami. I totally agree with him. I couldn't have said better myself. We start seeing this freakish, scary, economic reports coming from Russia that are more scary than horror movies. Already seen them, but hey, imagine what we have to come, according to one of Russia's top officials. Whoa. I named today's economic update review, All Industries Are Dying. Let's talk of that a little bit. Well, you know what? Before, let me take this opportunity to thank you. Thank you for being part of Inside Russia community. Thank you for watching, liking, commenting, interacting. Thank you for the coffees you buy at buymeacoffee.com. For PayPal, Patreon. I'm demonetized by Google, but not broken. I give you a promise that every single day I will continue telling you the truth. You have my word on that. Thank you. In the beginning of this year, there were a few industries in Russia in very poor situation. I would say catastrophic or close to catastrophic. And the leader of those industries was coal mining industry. The only customer of Russian miners was China. And for years, Russian coal was extracted and sold to China. And in 2024, China stopped buying Russian coal completely. And that was it. Remember, I mentioned diversification earlier today in oil exports? Well, it happened with coal first. The Chinese were buying, and Russia did not diversify. The Chinese stopped buying, and the industry died. The pulp and paper industry and metallurgical industry followed. They were in extremely poor shape. Well, now all industries in Russia, except for one, all civic industries are in deep troubles, in big crisis, and some of them are dying and some of them are dead already. Now, before I go any further, what is a dead industry? The industry that is not working, is not producing, is not selling. And the dead industry, in my eyes, in my opinion, is the coal industry. It's dead. First 4 months, consolidated loss of all companies in the industry amounted to 128 billion rubles. By the end of the year, the loss is projected to be 350 billion rubles. People are let go, massive layoffs. Oh, it makes sense. The mines are closing. There's so much overstocking of coal. They don't know what to do with it. No one is buying any coal. There's no money flow. The industry is dead. The companies are closing. Metallurgy. There's a full-blown crisis in the industry as well. And it's not dead yet, but it's going there fast. The best illustration of the crisis at recent St. Petersburg International Economic Forum, Alexander Shevelyov, a very respected insider, the CEO of Severstal, one of Russia's and world's largest steel producing companies, spoke at the forum and warned everyone publicly about possible complete closure of all metallurgical plants in Russia. If it's not death of the industry, then what death is? The guy, when he was delivering his message, he wasn't kidding. Things are bad. The main reason for the industry's decline is very similar to what's happening with the coal industry. The loss of the main customer, but not the Chinese, the European market. You see, Russian steel companies, manufacturers, well, producers, they were, in the past, when Russia was not waging the war in Ukraine, they were supplying steel mostly to Europe, not any longer. So they are nearing closing all steel producing plants. And domestic demand will never cover the lost exports. I totally agree with Shevelyov. He's right on. All right, some more numbers for you. Road construction equipment and machinery sales declined by 41% in June. 41%. Now, have you heard anything like that? These numbers, 42% sales of new real estate in Moscow, 41% the sales of equipment and machinery. Wow. I've never heard of anything like that. Imagine the magnitude of the crisis happening in Russia. If it's not the economic tsunami, then what it is? Well, now, the reason for this 41% drop of sales, very simple. They don't build or repair as many roads any longer. So this machinery is not needed. There is no money to build or repair roads, and it's clearly seen by the declining state of Russian roads. And so therefore, the companies who build or repair roads, construct or repair roads, they don't have money, though they don't buy any machinery. Now, the next number, the railroad container transportation. That's an indicator of cargo flow between Russia and China, mostly because, a lot of goods from China supplied through railroads from the eastern part of Russia to the western part. The railroad container transportation fell by 5% in the first half of 2025. By 5%, that's a lot. The reason? There are much less goods transported from China to Russia. Russians simply stopped spending. Well, not completely, but they started saving a lot. They spend so much less now, so there so much less cargo containers are shipped by railroad from China to Russia. Now, the next number. Car dealers, oh, don't we love those? Very simple business, very easy to understand, very transparent. There's a car manufacturer and there's a car dealer. Manufactured at the plant, shipped to the dealer, dealer sells the car. Well, guess what? In July of 2025, 33% of car dealers in Russia are closing their doors or have closed already and are nearing bankruptcies. The reason? That's pretty much the same. The lack of money leads to fall in car sales. So Russia's car sales industry, I guess car making Russia doesn't have the car making industry. but the Russians sell mostly Chinese cars now. That's not going well. And you know what? I can go on for a long time with other industries. What I want to attract your attention to, and this is important. So, two things. First of all, every single industry, civic industry, that is not connected to the war, to the Russia's military-industrial complex, every single industry is in crisis. And of course, they're all, they stand differently in terms of their performance. Some, like I said, already dead, and some are just on the way there. But they're all suffering. There's crisis in every single industry. It's not the first time that some Russian industries suffer. In every major crisis back in 2008, back in 2016, things happened in Russian companies, large Russian companies, and whole industries, they hurt. It happens once in a while. Economy lives in cycles. In the past, the situation was different. There was usually support from the state. Basically, large enterprises and whole industries sometimes, they came together and would go to the state to beg for bailouts. And they usually got bailed out. I'll just give you two examples. Russian combine harvester manufacturer Rasselmash, based in Rostov-on-Don. My father spent most of his professional life working at that factory. He considered it his second home. I know the company quite well. It was privatized in 91, and it continued to produce combine harvesters. But every single year, Rasselmash received subsidies from Russian state. Second company, the example is Rosneft, Russia's largest and perhaps one of world's largest oil extracting companies. Every single year, it received subsidies, huge subsidies from the Russian budget. Well, not because it was not profitable, it was always profitable, but because it's headed by Putin's personal assistant for a very long time, Igor Sechin. He was, literally, he was the personal assistant of Vladimir Putin back in St. Petersburg, and when Vladimir Putin moved to Moscow and started working at the Kremlin. So as the reward for his services, Igor Sechin was given Rosneft, former Yukos, one of world's largest oil companies, and Vladimir Putin gave him gifts every single year, subsidies. I believe the last one I know for sure was $694 billion. Billion rubles back in 2020, right before the COVID started. 2019. COVID started early in 2020. So just this draws you a picture that Russian state always bailed out large enterprises. But not any longer. Not any longer. There's a very clear message coming from Russian officials, from the Ministry of Economic Development, from the Ministry of Finance. No money for you. The coal companies came, the coal mines, big coal mines, and asked for money, and they were basically got denied. So not this time. It's not looking good for Russian markets, for enterprises in different industries. I think that the state, when there will be crisis blown out of proportion, okay, and that's going to come in a few months, I think the state will resort to expropriating the companies, stealing them from the rightful owners, and taking ownership and management in its own hands. But that's my forecast. I don't, Don't quote me on that, but we'll see what happens. What I said earlier is that all industries are not doing well except for one. What is that one industry that is doing fabulously well right now in Russia? What is it? Well, it's a funeral industry. They have the companies in funeral business. They have many customers these days, and they're showing record profits. Now, let's jump to the third part of the report: macroeconomic indicators, the general health of Russian economy. And I'll try to be brief there, but at this point, I would like to ask you two favors. Please like this video now and consider becoming patron of Inside Russia, because every day I come up with 9 news that I find important for understanding Russia and that you will not find in any mainstream media. If you want to stay on top of things Russia, consider joining Patreon. You'll be informed. Thank you. So now to the macroeconomics stuff. A few points here. The federal budget. Expenses of the federal budget in the first half of 2025 increased by 18%, and revenues of federal budget increased only by 1.6%. The deficit of the federal budget in June amounted to 300 billion rubles. In June alone. Now, this is the big picture of the performance of Russian economy. Vladimir Putin, I'll jump later to that. Planned deficit for the entire 2025 was 1.3 trillion rubles. That was planned in the federal budget for 2025. It was discussed in the Russian parliament. It was signed by Vladimir Putin. It was made into federal law. That's the procedure, okay? It was put on paper and signed by many people, including Putin himself. 1.3 trillion rubles. In reality, for the first half of 2025, the deficit was 3 times higher than planned. Instead of 1.3 trillion, it turned out to be 3.7 trillion. And I think at this point, with the way things are going, it's safe to forecast that it's going to be the deficit of the range from 7 to 8 trillion rubles at the end of 2025. So they planned 1.3, but they knew that it was going to be so much more. But anyway, they lied to Russian voters and taxpayers again. They planned for 1.3, and in reality, it's going to be, let's say, 8. That's a disastrous number. I want to attract your attention to one very important thing that made the news all over, and I was even asked in comments a couple times. 2 weeks ago, Vladimir Putin publicly, for the first time in a few years, publicly, in front of the entire country, spoke of cutting the expenses of federal budget. Now, at the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum, just a week prior, it was all good. Russian economy was doing great. The future was so bright. There's so much money. The Russians were swimming in money. The salaries were growing. When I was listening to his speech, I was thinking, Vladimir, give me some of that good stuff you're smoking. You're living in a completely different reality from ours, from the Russians, okay? He was just, he was in the world of the Through the Looking Glass by Lewis Carroll, 1 week later, the very same person spoke to the entire country, and he said that things are troubling. Situation not so good, and the expenses of the federal budget need to be cut. A lot of Russians kind of exhaled, said, "Whoa, this is final change to the economy. Instead of pumping money into the military-industrial complex, we will see cuts. We won't be spending so much on the war." Ha ha! Let me translate Putin's words into simple English. Russian people, you will be eating less, he said. They're not going to cut the military expenses, but they will cut everything else. In Russian, it's called sequester. They're going to sequester, cut all the salaries of teachers, of doctors, of university professors, anyone they can get their hands on. It's coming. Okay, so the federal budget deficit. Number 2, the inflation. Oh, it's increasing. Oh, first week of July of 2025, the inflation amounted to 0.79%. Did that number register with you? Because this is huge. 0.79 in 1 week. That's getting close to 1% in 1 week. The United States planned inflation for the entire year. I think it's 2.5%. In Russia, 1%, well, not 1, but getting close to 1% in 1 week. And that is the number, 0.79%, released by the government, by Росстат. And we know what that we should take. How do I put it very mildly? We should take those numbers with a grain of salt. I'm trying to be, soft and polite, with a grain of salt. Damn liars! That's what I really should have said. Imagine what the real inflation is. If they're saying 0.79, the real is higher. Well, July inflation was kind of expected because what they did on July 1st, they made a sharp increase of all utility tariffs for all Russians and for all enterprises in Russia. July 1st, and that usually drives inflation up. Inflation will be, it's going to feel this effect of the tariffs for the entire July and probably 2 or 3 weeks of August. Just to give you an idea of how much they raised the tariffs, for regular people, for tariffs for water, for heat, for electricity, for sewage, went up, I would say in general, different provinces, they set up their own different tariffs. But if we take the general hike in tariffs, between 13 and 15%, something like that. But for businesses, the increase in tariffs was higher, and in some cases was outrageous. For example, for some companies, cost of water supply increased by 10 times, tenfold. Imagine that. Now, the central bank is in a very tight spot right now. There's a meeting of the central bank coming up in a few days. It's going to be held on July 26th. And usually at meetings, they take actions on the key interest rate. They either leave it unchanged or change it. Elvira Nabiulina has been under tremendous pressure from the military-industrial complex and from pretty much most government agencies to lower the key interest rate. She did so at the last meeting. She lowered by 1%, used to be 21, now it's 20. And now there are most experts forecasting another decrease in the key interest rate by 2%. to 18%. Okay, but before Elvira Nabiulina was given the reason for lowering the key interest rate as inflation got under control. So the central bank got hold of inflation. It wasn't growing as high any longer. But then comes July 1st, the tariffs, and, week 28 brings us 0.79, the record inflation. Now, what will the central bank do now? That I don't really know. Because if they lower the interest rate, the inflation is going to, like Elon Musk's rockets, if they don't, they can't lower. I mean, all economic rules scream, do not lower the key interest rate now at these conditions. Perhaps increase it, okay? But will Elvira Nabiulina get a call from Vladimir Putin a day before the meeting? That happened in November of 2024. And she was acting scared when she did not raise the key interest rate. Okay, will that happen again? We don't know. Anyway, I'm keeping my eyes open. 26, and it's going to be in 9 days. So, in the economic update in early August. So I'll definitely inform you what happens then. So, indicator number 3, stock market. It's declining. Russia's stock market combined index fell to the lowest in 2025, last week, week 28. It fell to 2642, 2,642 points. And it's also expected. And guess what? The index will be falling further. The general mood is recession, decline, catastrophe, the death of industries, not just companies, the confiscations by the government. And I'm going to make a live stream about that. That's a huge problem. Well, can't really say it's a problem. It's a very significant action that the government is taking. It's expropriating private companies, stealing from rightful owners and throwing owners into prisons. Okay? So any normal investor who buys stock of different companies would be selling. What do investors see in the future of Russia? Well, I don't know, not much. And there's certainly no light at the end of the tunnel. I would say that there's a darkness at the end of the tunnel, and then it's getting closer and closer. And sooner or later, if things are going the way they've been going, the stock market of Russia will just die. There'll be no stock to trade. Well, Russian stock market index is just reflecting this mood of the investors, of those who are still playing at the stock market, so to speak, trading. And number 4, and that's an honorable mention, Russia is seeing skyrocketing expenses of servicing government's debt. Surprise, surprise! They didn't know what was going to happen, of course. Those people in the Ministry of Finance, at the central bank, they had no clue that debt costs money. There's a fee to service the debt. No, they didn't know that. And now all of a sudden they woke up and they said, what's going on? The expenses of federal budget for servicing national debt have tripled in 4 years. That shows you that the Russian state has been borrowing like crazy. And that's not the problem. The problem is that no one is buying federal, the state bonds, because no one trusts federal government. The investors, the foreign investors are gone. I think they're even forbidden to touch Russian federal bonds. Russian investors they're non-existent. Regular people, I don't know many who buy Russian bonds. And that forces the state to increase the interest rate. They increase the compensation. I think the latest I heard was around 16%. Now, just to let you know, if you buy US bonds, they're sold right now around 4.5%, I believe, perhaps even lower. In Russia, 16%. And 16%, it doesn't make any sense to borrow any longer because you service that debt, and everything you take, you spend by servicing what you borrowed before. So that's a huge problem for Russian state. Another huge problem. And that simply adds to the grim picture of Russian economy, its current state. And this concludes week 28, Russia's economic summary report. Thank you very much for joining today. Carthago delenda est.